On June 2nd, 2015, a routine rafting expedition through the Grand Canyon turned into a baffling mystery. Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old river guide from Cody, Wyoming, was leading a commercial rafting trip along the Colorado River. Heimer was an experienced outdoorsman, a strong swimmer, and a seasoned guide familiar with the canyon's perils. That afternoon, day 6 of an 8-day trip, the group stopped near a landmark called Pumpkin Springs at River Mile 213 for a side hike and some cliff jumping fun. As clients took turns leaping from a low rock ledge into the water, Heimer assisted them, ensuring everyone's safety. Once the last client had jumped, Heimer mentioned to the lead guide that he was going to take a short break while they prepared to head back to the boats. The lead guide stepped away briefly to speak with a guest, but when he turned around, Morgan was nowhere to be seen. At first, no one panicked, and it was assumed that Heimer had simply wandered off for a moment of solitude or to relax out of the sun. He was last observed at approximately 4 p.m., standing on that riverside ledge with his guide gear on, including a life vest. He was also carrying a distinctive purple water bottle, which the park officials hoped would be a significant clue going forward. There was no splash, no cry for help, no obvious sign of an accident. One moment he was part of the group, and the next he had vanished almost into thin air. Hours passed with the team assuming their guide would reappear after his break. It wasn't until around 7 p.m., when Morgan failed to show up at camp for dinner, that serious concern set in. The other party members searched the immediate area, calling out his name and scanning the river's edge, but there was no trace of Morgan. As dusk fell with still no sign of the young guide, the group realized something was very wrong and placed a satellite phone call to park authorities to report him missing. Early the next morning, Grand Canyon National Park rangers launched a major search and rescue operation. A helicopter crew flew to the area at first light on June 3rd, inserting rangers near the spot where Morgan was last seen. 3 ground teams fanned out along the rocky banks, while a boat team scoured the river. Searchers faced grueling conditions and the summer heat was extremely intense. Despite these challenges, they combed diligently through an extensive area, covering roughly a 14-mile stretch of river and about 4 miles of adjacent land around Pumpkin Springs. They looked for any clue: a piece of clothing, footprints, his purple water bottle, or the dark life vest that might have been caught on rocks or river debris. When initial sweeps found nothing, the search radius was expanded westward downriver toward the Diamond Creek Takeout. This is a popular exit point for rafting trips about 12 miles beyond where Morgan disappeared. The idea was to ensure that if he had been carried downstream, no stretch of riverbank would be left uninspected. Interviews were conducted with everyone on the trip, and even with other river groups who had been in the area, in case someone had seen something that might help explain what happened. But day after day, the canyon yielded no secrets. There were no signs of a struggle or an animal encounter, and no evidence that Heimer had attempted to hike out of the canyon on foot. By June 8th, after 6 full days of intensive searching by air, water, and land, not a single clue to Morgan's fate had turned up. With heavy hearts, officials made the difficult decision to scale back the operation. The search was transitioned to a limited mode, meaning rangers and pilots would keep an eye out for any telltale signs during routine patrols, but the large-scale hunt was suspended. Morgan Heimer's disappearance left both investigators and loved ones grasping for answers. Here was a capable guide, intimately familiar with the dangers of the river, equipped with a life jacket and survival knowledge. Yet he had vanished without leaving even a footprint behind. In the immediate aftermath, the working theory was that Morgan must have somehow fallen into the Colorado River and drowned, his body likely swept away by the strong current. This theory made sense to many. The river was swift and powerful, and even with a personal flotation device, An accident in certain rapids or whirlpools could pin a person underwater. If he was caught in an underwater crevice or entangled in debris, his remains might not surface for a long time, if ever. Rescuers noted that given Morgan's skills and fitness, they initially believed he would be easy to find, which made the complete lack of results even more troubling. As days passed with no sign of him, the presumption of a fatal water accident grew stronger, simply because no other scenario had any supporting evidence. In the absence of answers, several theories persist among those who follow the case. The prevailing theory remains that Morgan fell into the Colorado River and succumbed to a tragic accident. Perhaps he lost his footing on the wet rock, or got too close to the edge, and the river's swift current did the rest. If so, the Colorado may have carried him far downstream, or pinned him in a submerged pocket, explaining why extensive searches failed to recover a body or even a piece of gear. Another theory, harder to reconcile with Morgan's expertise, is that he ventured briefly into the wild and got fatally lost or injured. Did he step inland for just a moment, to find a private spot or to take in the view, and then suffer a fall in the labyrinth of cliffs and crevices set back from the water's edge? The area is remote and unforgiving. Even a short walk away from the group could turn treacherous if one slips into a hidden ravine or encounters an unseen hazard. Yet, considering Morgan's familiarity with wilderness terrain, this makes this more unlikely. After all, he was acutely aware of such dangers, much more so than the average person. Moreover, the intensive land search found no trace of him in the surrounding quarter-mile radius of the canyon, where such an accident would likely occur. This theory, while not completely impossible, leaves many park officials skeptical, given the lack of any supporting evidence. Other more sinister activities have also been suggested, from foul play to potential supernatural explanations. However, neither of these theories have any evidence to back them up, and they remain highly speculative. Today, nearly a decade later, the disappearance of Morgan Heimer remains an open case and an enduring heartbreak for his family, friends, and the tight-knit river guide community. The National Park Service keeps Morgan on their list of cold cases, and the investigation remains officially ongoing in a limited capacity. On a crisp March morning in 2012, a white Ford Escape sat abandoned at the Newfound Gap overlook in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a silent witness to an unfolding mystery. Its owner, 24-year-old Derek Lucking, had vanished into the wilderness before dawn. Derek was by all accounts a responsible young man and a recent college graduate, but that day he was nowhere to be found. Inside his vehicle lay one eerie clue, a handwritten note that read, "Don't come find me." Derek lived in Louisville, Tennessee, not far from the Smokies. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, he had been unhappy with the direction of his life. Family members noticed he wasn't acting like himself, he grew withdrawn, and even picked up some uncharacteristic habits like drinking and smoking. These were small red flags, but nothing to suggest what was about to happen. On Wednesday, March 14th, 2012, Derek left home unexpectedly, sometime during the night. The next morning, he failed to show up for work. His roommate found Derek's alarm clock ringing in an empty room and knew something was wrong. Calls to Derek's phone went unanswered. Alarmed, the roommate contacted Derek's parents in Virginia, and they began a frantic overnight drive to Tennessee to search for their son. When Derek's parents arrived and checked his computer for clues, they discovered he'd been researching Great Smoky Mountains National Park. More tellingly, he had reserved a hotel room for the night of March 16th in Cherokee, North Carolina, just outside the park. Clinging to hope, his parents headed toward Cherokee, thinking they might intercept him there. Early on Saturday, March 17th, surveillance cameras at a motel in Cherokee captured Derek in the lobby around 4 a.m. He checked out and walked into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying a small day pack. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. When his parents reached the hotel later that morning, they learned they had just missed Derek. Inside the room he left, they found a Bible on the bed and an empty liquor bottle on the floor, objects that hinted at a personal crisis during his final night. Shortly afterward, as Derek's family drove back through the park, they spotted his Ford Escape parked at Newfound Gap, a scenic pass on the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. The car was empty, and fearing the worst but determined to find him, they alerted park rangers immediately. Investigators opened the vehicle and discovered an assortment of newly purchased camping gear and supplies inside. Derek had clearly been preparing for an outdoor excursion. There was a tent, a sleeping bag, tools, maps, food rations, and a survival guide. Strangely, all that equipment was left behind in the car. Derek hadn't taken the tent, the sleeping bag, or most of the supplies with him, only what he could fit in his pack. His wallet, identification cards, and cash were also in the vehicle. And on the dashboard was that ominous note, "Don't come find me." It now seemed that Derek had walked into the woods of his own accord, for reasons unknown. Park rangers and search teams sprang into action as soon as Derek was reported missing. The park was busy with visitors that day, yet no one remembered seeing a hiker matching Derek's description. On that clear spring morning, he had slipped away unseen. Searchers initially combed the popular trails from Newfound Gap, calling his name and looking for any sign of him. When that yielded nothing, they pushed into the rugged woods off the trails. For days, teams of rangers, volunteers, and search dogs scoured steep ridges and creek valleys near where the car was found. They looked for footprints, scraps of clothing, or any other clue, but found none. Derek had only a light day pack with him and was not an experienced outdoorsman, which made his situation even more precarious. After about a week of intense searching, not a single trace of him turned up. As the days passed with no results, the official search was eventually scaled back. Derek had effectively vanished without a single trace. In the absence of answers, a few theories have been put forward to explain what might have happened to Derek Lucking. One theory is that Derek intended to vanish on his own and start a new life. The note he left strongly suggests he did not want to be found. Perhaps he was overwhelmed by his life and saw escape as the answer. It's possible he staged his hike into the Smokies as a diversion, then quietly slipped away from the area. Abandoning his car and ID, he effectively shed his old identity. While no evidence has surfaced that he resettled somewhere else, he could have managed to stay off the grid. Another theory is that Derek was in a disturbed state of mind and went into the wilderness intending not to return. He had been struggling emotionally, and the timing of his disappearance reportedly coincided with the anniversary of his grandfather's death. The Bible and empty liquor bottle in his hotel room suggest he might have been wrestling with despair or seeking courage before venturing out. In this view, the note in his car reads like a final goodbye to his friends and family. However, since no remains were found despite extensive searching, this heartbreaking scenario is unconfirmed, and his family holds out hope that it isn't what happened. A third theory is that Derek ventured into the mountains on a personal survival challenge but fell victim to a mishap. And surprisingly, there is some circumstantial evidence to support this. He was reportedly a big fan of Bear Grylls, who was very well known at the time for his show Man vs. Wild. Perhaps he wanted to test himself by going off trail with only basic supplies, though that doesn't explain the supplies that were left behind. Unfortunately, the Smoky Mountain wilderness is unforgiving, especially for someone alone and inexperienced. It's easy to get lost, injured, or succumbed to exposure in the steep, tangled terrain. If Derek was hurt or stranded far from the trails, the vast expanse of the park could have kept him hidden from rescuers. In this scenario, his disappearance was a tragic accident. He underestimated the wilderness, and nature simply hid all traces of what happened. A final theory is that Derek encountered danger in the form of another person. Some have speculated he could have stumbled upon an illicit activity, or met someone with bad intentions in the woods. Of course, this is entirely possible, but ultimately no evidence supports this idea. There were no signs of a struggle or theft at his car, and all his valuables were left untouched. No witness reports or leads have ever pointed to any crime whatsoever. Without any concrete clues suggesting foul play, investigators consider this the least likely explanation, though it can't be completely ruled out. More than a decade has passed since Derek Lucking walked into the Smoky Mountains and vanished, and no trace of him has ever been found. His family has never stopped seeking answers, and the case remains open. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to take a moment to share this video with your friends and on your socials. Also, if you didn't know, I also have two other channels, Lazy Chill History and Lazy Chill True Crime. These channels revolve around historical content and resolve true crime cases respectively. In June 2016, Floyd Roberts III, a 52-year-old high school teacher and former NASA engineer from Florida, would go missing under mysterious circumstances. An avid outdoorsman, he joined two friends for a backcountry hike in a remote part of the Grand Canyon. Roberts had decades of hiking experience and was well prepared with food, water, and maps for the planned 9-day journey. The group's route would take them across the rugged Shivwitz Plateau and down to the Colorado River, eventually exiting the canyon on June 26th. For Roberts and his friends, this trek was meant to be a grand adventure, and they had done a similar trip in 2010. But on the very first day of the 2016 trip, Roberts mysteriously disappeared, sparking an intense search and a baffling mystery that remains unsolved. On day one of the hike, June 17, 2016, the trio encountered a hill near an area called Kelly Tank. They decided to take two different routes around it and meet up shortly after. His companions climbed over the hill while Floyd walked around its base. When his friends reached the other side, Roberts was nowhere to be seen. They waited and called his name, then retraced their steps back to where they last saw him, but found no sign of their friend. By the next morning, they realized something was very wrong. They hiked until they could get a cell phone signal and called for help. Roberts was officially reported missing to park authorities on June 18th, nearly 24 hours after he had last been seen. The National Park Service launched a large search and rescue operation immediately. The location in the western Grand Canyon was extremely remote and rugged, making access difficult. Park rangers, volunteer wilderness searchers, and search and rescue teams from two counties converged to help. A base camp was established near Roberts' last known location to coordinate the effort. Over the next 6 days, dozens of people scoured roughly 10 square miles of canyon and plateau country on foot and by helicopter. They faced harsh conditions. An extreme heat wave had temperatures well over 100 degrees, and the terrain was dense with brush, cliffs, and steep ravines. Despite these challenges, searchers combed the area day and night, determined to find any sign of Roberts. Helicopters flew low over ravines looking for the bright red of his shirt or the blue of his backpack, and search dogs were brought in to track his scent. Some potential clues did surface, and at one point, a set of shoe prints was spotted in the dirt, but rangers could not confirm if it belonged to Roberts. No other trace of him or his equipment turned up during the extensive sweep. By June 23rd, after an exhaustive effort, officials had to scale back the search. With no leads left to pursue, the operation shifted to a limited search, where rangers would keep an eye out during routine patrols. In the absence of evidence, several theories have been proposed about what might have happened to Floyd Roberts. The main ideas include an accidental fall, disorientation leading to exposure, possible foul play, and even a voluntary disappearance. One possibility is that Roberts suffered a misstep and fell into a hidden canyon or off a ledge. The area is full of sheer drops and tricky terrain. If he fell and was injured or killed, his body could be concealed in a spot that search teams never checked, which would explain why nothing was found. There have been numerous cases in the Grand Canyon where a missing hiker's remains were discovered only years later in a hard-to-reach area. Another theory is that he became lost and succumbed to the elements. Facing extreme heat and lack of water, Roberts, despite being an experienced hiker, may have become extremely disoriented and confused. Roberts might have wandered in the wrong direction seeking a route or water source and eventually collapsed from dehydration or heat stroke. If he moved beyond the search zone before he died, his remains could still lie undiscovered in the vast maze of side canyons. Alternatively, he may have sought refuge somewhere hidden and perished there. Investigators considered foul play, but found no evidence to support it. The authorities considered it unlikely he encountered a hostile stranger in such an isolated area. Further, his hiking companions, who were reported to be a father and daughter who were his longtime friends, alerted authorities as soon as possible. They also cooperated fully with the investigation and were almost immediately ruled out as suspects. Park officials found no signs of a struggle or any other indication of criminal activity at the scene. The absence of any evidence makes foul play a remote possibility, and most observers lean away from this theory. Another theory suggests that a wild animal such as a cougar could have attacked him and taken him away from the area. However, mountain lion attacks are extremely rare, and there was no sign of any encounter between one of these big cats and Floyd. Some have speculated that Roberts chose to deliberately vanish. This would mean using the trip as an opportunity to leave his life behind and start anew. However, those who knew him saw no indications of this. He had a stable job and family ties and was excited about the hike. Further, no motive or any proof of planning ever surfaced. Thus, this theory is generally considered the least likely by the authorities. Nearly 9 years have passed since Floyd Roberts went missing, and the National Park Service still lists his case as an open investigation.